Good evening. My name is Dennis Steadman, and welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Patterson Farm Master Plan Implementation Committee. And as of the last 3 seconds, we now have 5 of our 6 members present, a healthy quorum. So welcome to everyone. We have a busy agenda tonight. We'll try to efficiently work through that agenda. Before I do, maybe I could start on my right and just have members of the committee introduce themselves, please. Use the microphone.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Stark.
Good evening, Ron Schmid.
Good evening, Joe Camerata.
Fred Childs.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I call the meeting to order, and the first item is the review and approval of our September 24th meeting minutes, which I'll turn to our secretary, Fred Childs.
So the minutes were distributed last week to all the members. I received several indications that there were no further comments or changes or additions. So I would move that the minutes as distributed be approved.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor of approving? Say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Minutes are approved. Thank you, Fred.
Dennis, also, we neglected last time because the informal notes from the August informal meeting without a quorum were distributed late before the September meeting. So if we could also, if I haven't received any changes or comments or additions or corrections there, so if we could approve those as well.
Yes, we should. Any comments on those notes from that non-quorum informational meeting?
No comments.
No? Move to approve those notes as presented.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred. All right. Welcome to the Patterson Farm Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting. I think we're starting again about 8 minutes into the meeting. The computer dropped, so let me just abbreviate here. We had the call to order, review and approval of our September 24th minutes, as well as the minutes from our, I believe it was a July informational meeting, August informational meeting. Thank you. And now the first item of some meat is to review and discuss the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors for at their meeting coming up this Wednesday, October 23rd. So the first recommendation is, and we talked about this last month, is formation of a nonprofit entity to improve for the improvement and for property management of the Thomas Janney Homestead Historical Agricultural District. This committee has discussed that quite a bit. We can discuss it further, of course, and we can. I have dueling mice, I guess, here. We can discuss that further now, but I know there's been committee emails and discussion on some structural detail that we want to include for the Board of Supervisors meeting on Wednesday. Is that right? We talked about eligibility or inclusion of directors and some options there. Ron or Joe, do you want to try to kick that off? You'll be presenting on Wednesday. I'm not going to be available.
So as Dennis said, Dave Kratzer asked us, Dennis asked Dave about presentation of the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. And Dave responded, he liked that it was just distributed to the supervisors or that it was presented in a meeting. We said presented at a meeting. Dave had said this Wednesday, Dennis isn't available, so Ron and I volunteered to go to the Board of Supervisors meeting and present the recommendation as well as answer any questions the supervisors may have on that. We started an email discussion a little bit around how the structure of the nonprofit with regard, well, the structure with the Thomas Janney Homestead Historical Agricultural District, that nonprofit, with respect to the nonprofits of Patterson Farm Preservation and Artists of Yardley. And I had the opportunity when we were going through the master plan development to learn how the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, PHMC, how they approach this topic. And PHMC owns a number of historical properties across the state. And for the longest time, they were managing that. And by that, I meant they had their personnel on site in order to do the historical interpretation, make it open for visitors and things like that. Because of budget reasons, they could no longer afford to do that. They have with some sites, like Pennsbury, continued to do that. But for other sites, they have pulled back. They still own the sites, but they have entered into what's called management agreements with nonprofits who do the historical interpretation and help with the ongoing maintenance of the site. And what I had passed around, at least to our subcommittee, and I can pass it around to everyone, is a copy of what one of those management agreements look like. And in those management agreements, what PHMC says is they are generally responsible for the ongoing preservation of the site and maintenance of the site. But the management group actually provides the ongoing visitor experience, if you would, of what happens there. And there's, as you can imagine, in any agreement, there's language that basically says what they can do by themselves and what they need to collaborate on. It's very well spelled out. So my recommendation to the subcommittee was that the overall nonprofit, the Thomas Janney nonprofit,
Just for shorthand, I'm not saying it's the official name, but couldn't we call it the Thomas Janney Foundation? Just for a handle for right now, the Thomas Janney Foundation would be a nonprofit responsible for the Thomas Janney Homestead Historical Agricultural District.
Right. So yes,
Okay.
thank you. So
Okay.
the foundation would actually sign a lease with the township that gave it the right to do ongoing improvements or preservations and the property management, as we spelled out here in number A. But then the foundation would form management agreements with the other nonprofits. So at least the two that are mentioned here are Patterson Farm Preservation and AOY, which kind of spells out the responsibility of the foundation vis-a-vis the individual nonprofits. And essentially that the overall property management and preservation stays with the foundation. I mean, obviously, where it matters, they're going to collaborate with the nonprofits around preservations, especially where it comes to fundraising and volunteer engagement on those topics. But then the nonprofits would take over the responsibility of interpreting the site as we know we've laid out in the master plan and providing programs, events, what have you, in order to engage the public. And just to kind of give you real quick, they actually spell out in their management plans how often, how many days per year the site needs to be available to the public and what types of events and interpretation are appropriate for that. So that would be my recommendation going forward in terms of how the overall foundation, the responsibilities of the foundation versus the foundation of the individual nonprofits.
Discussion?
I think it's a good model, Joe. I think what PHMC has done with all the sites, the 30-something sites across the state. I think that's a very good model to build upon. I mean, there's going to be some details that are going to be tough to be worked out here, but I would agree that's a good model to work from.
So the model of a management agreement that gives this new Thomas Janney Foundation those responsibilities, as you've indicated, to me seems very clear, and I think that is a good model. That's in terms of the responsibilities and in terms of the relationship between the foundation and Lower Makefield Township. Then there's also a topic about how to best implement that. And because the township already has an approved 501c3, a nonprofit fund called the Community Fund, that they have used as an appropriate nonprofit vessel to get contributions, charitable contributions into a 501c3, historically, for example, for the Garden of Reflection and for other type of charitable nonprofit kind of activities. There's discussion as to whether we are forming a brand new 501c3 and the regulatory tax process that one has to go through with both the state and the IRS, or if there's a relationship with the existing 501c3 called the Community Fund that can be established, where that community fund is in essence the agent of this new foundation, and it is doing the bookkeeping and the necessary reporting, but the foundation is responsible for the funds, and the community fund, LMT Community Fund, is simply an administrative vessel, as I say. And as far as we know, that is an option structurally, correct? And you've investigated that?
Yeah, it's what's called a fiscal agent. So the
Fiscal agent, thank you.
Community Foundation Fund would be the fiscal agent for the Thomas Janney Foundation.
Okay.
Meaning that the foundation would still need to be formed. It would still need to be a nonprofit, as we have recommended. So it would have its own board and it would have its own bylaws. But all contributions would go to the community fund and they would be tax deductible. And this doesn't mean it always needs to be that way, because when I've talked to other nonprofits about this, they've talked about the difficulty of and the amount of time required to form a 501c3. And they said that it can often start where you start with a fiscal agent, but then as you grow and you have more funds, you become your own 501c3 and you don't have the agency. I do know that the Historical Commission uses the community fund. For example, we just did a fundraising event past Saturday for the ghost tour, and then all those funds will go into that. But we never aspire very much beyond just kind of those events that give us some money. But I think in the case of this foundation, where it would be looking at raising a lot more money for preservation, both through grants and philanthropy, at some point, it may make sense to convert to its own 501c3. But we don't need to wait for that to start.
Does the township, I presume that township currently manages or oversees that fund, and so that would continue then in this case?
That fund has three directors, Dave Kratzer being one. I think the Chief Caluzzi is another.
Allison Stewart's the third.
Okay. But that as you're saying, Joe, I see that as a bridge, as a convenient bridge to start the fundraising, as opposed to the ultimate solution kind of thing. I think this foundation needs to be standing on its own as 501c3. But while we're making those applications and going through that process, I don't know what the paperwork is, but I would think we can do the paperwork to have that community foundation, community fund, be the fiscal agent for this spawning Thomas Janney Foundation, right? Okay.
I mean, I would say that the pros to that are we can start the capital campaign and start to get, bring in the monies that are going to be needed to be turned over to the two nonprofits that we're talking about running separate parts of it. I think that's really positive because anybody contributing money then gets the tax deduction. The downside to it is if we are going to create a separate 501c3, it takes a lot of time and money. And that's the downside to it.
We had said it was like a couple grand in about
Yeah,
6
it's
months.
about $3,000. And then the longest time period is with the IRS. The benefit is, as it was explained to me, is once the IRS makes a decision, it's then retroactive
Right.
to that. So once you start filing papers to form your own 501c3, that's the start date, even though you're not finally approved. Then when you get approved, it's approved to the date you filed your papers.
One comment I have is I think it's important when we talk about forming this Thomas Janney Foundation that we not, in that same conversation, not try to define the relationship between that foundation and future tenants, because I think that's just full of potential pitfalls. To me, it's about getting the foundation established, the relationship with the township, the rights, a clear definition of what the foundation can and can't do in terms of property management and improvement, and then that foundation can enter into agreements with with potential tenants, whether that tenant is a for-profit entity or a nonprofit entity, that's to be determined, right? I mean, because my fear is if we try to discuss it 2 or 3 levels deep, it we'll get lost and cause confusion. You agree?
Yes, I do.
Mm.
And there's good experience with what the township has done already in terms of the Garden of Reflection, the dog park, and other activities that they've pursued, where the monies are very targeted to that area. So in our case, it would be a holding pattern to hold it there so that we can start immediately to raise funds, because otherwise there's no vehicle to truly do that.
Right. Yeah, they're the fiscal agent in the beginning. And as the Thomas Janney Foundation gets its own momentum, established a board of directors and some operations, then and with the final IRS approval.
And just
And
for
that
the
won't be
record, because I
necessary.
had questions about this, for the record, they have to send in their 990 form, which details all of these data, and anybody can review the data.
Right.
It's an open book when
Right.
you file your 990, which the Community Foundation has done for several years.
Right. Right. Okay. Other items on the
Well,
implementation?
I'm still not clear. I think maybe some details how that works in terms of we're expecting to have maybe individual contributions, maybe corporate donors, maybe grants, other sources, and how that's all tracked and kept recorded so that it is dedicated for this purpose for the Thomas Janney district, the property itself, and not have some emergency issue that the township suddenly needs some cash for.
Well, yeah, and I was reassured and assured by David Kratzer that it is completely isolated fund and very trackable. Dan, welcome. Supervisor Greniers joined us. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. With respect to, so we're starting our budget meetings over the next couple of supervisor meetings, and we've asked our township manager to do exactly, I think, what you're alluding to.
Well, actually, what we're talking about the recommending to the Board of Supervisors on Wednesday, the formation of, for shorthand right now, we'll just call it the Thomas Janney Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. That will take some time administratively to get to become established. And we're talking about the 501c3 that the township currently has called a community fund, acting as our fiscal agent for a period of time to help that transition where monies could come in there and be properly categorized as tax-free donations and accounted for by the township administrative staff.
And the board and myself, we've had that conversation with Mr. Kratzer and our solicitor, just anticipating this would be something like
Okay.
this year. So I think everyone's aware and is on board with that approach.
Right. And in this discussion on Wednesday night, I don't know how deep we want to get into the structural details of the nonprofit. Doesn't seem necessary, but it would be, it would have board members, and our thinking right now is that the township would get to name a certain number of board members to that nonprofit, as well as, in any citizen that's motivated to contribute and be part of a board, as is normally the case with a nonprofit. But there be set aside certain seats so that the township has that confidence in the dealings of the nonprofit, which is managing township-owned property.
Yeah. So I think to your, I don't know if the question or your comment about how much detail you need to get into, this week, probably not a ton.
Okay.
Just plant the seed, give the recommendation, and then allow us to start the process and then develop the requirements and everything else along the way.
Okay.
I know
Right.
that it's going to be a busy meeting.
Yeah.
Lots of budget stuff to be covered. I think it's quite a
Okay.
hefty budget, a lot of issues to cover. So
I think what's important to this committee is just getting the decision by the Board of Supervisors to go ahead and do that, and then we can participate along with the township in putting that structure together and the rest. But we're not going to start doing that until there's a nod of approval.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
understood. I know I spoke to a couple different supervisors about more curiosity than it was any sort of critique about the name of the proposed.
Well, the foundation would not carry that name. The name is part of the historical registry. That'll be registered as a historical
Okay.
place.
Right, the name,
Okay.
But
was my
we
guess.
can call the nonprofit. We could call it Dan's nonprofit if we wanted. I'm not suggesting that in the least, but
Trouble for that one.
but for shorthand, we're saying Thomas Janney Foundation.
Yeah.
I think as long as there's a foundation in the title or friends of in the title,
Popular.
it should become pretty clear. We don't need the full handle, if you will.
I got you.
Right. Okay. All right. Anything else on that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the item B.
so I do have a question on the language, and this might not be important right now, but we say enter into preliminary lease discussions. And it wouldn't necessarily be a lease as much as it would be a management agreement. It might be too fine a point to be making right now. We want to change that to,
And we certainly may. I chose that language, and I'm not saying it's right, because both Patterson Farm Preservation and AOY have, to varying degrees, had discussions where they would want to manage a subset of the property. And in all candor, I think Patterson Farm Preservation was more holistic in their desire to be that manager than was AOY. AOY was, their proposal was more tentative in terms of, well, actually picking lease, future leasors or getting too involved in the management. They were, I think, thinking of themselves more as a tenant with multiple buildings as opposed to a manager. So I put it in the context of lease simply to kind of cover everything. And depending upon the details, and they could vary by organization, of course, it may end up to be a lease of multiple buildings. It could be a lease and management responsibility of a subset of buildings. So that's TBD. And that's why I put it in the context of preliminary, simply because this committee cannot enter into a binding lease with anyone. It's the township that would do that. So any discussions we have, we would have to put in the context of preliminary subject to final approval of the township. But rather than dragging the township into it too early, I thought this committee could make quite a bit of progress with those preliminary discussions. Does that make sense?
One of the things that'll be helpful to the board, I think, when this is presented, is to present it in the context of the master plan. So like,
Sure.
For example, I'll oversimplify it, right? Someone comes in, hasn't really been following the master plan, saying, okay, why would the township enter into a lease agreement with this specific group and that specific group versus anybody else that might want to use the buildings for something? So now I think we all, since we talk about it all the time, understand that, but it would just be helpful to give it within the context of the master plan, why we're focused on AOY, why we're focused on people who are listening, maybe not following it quite as closely.
Right.
Understand that.
And that's why what I just put up on the board was a document that we discussed at last month's meeting, where we put it in the context of the master plan that has basically 8 initiatives for this first stage, and then how we got there, and these recommendations in the context of what initiative, which one of those 8 initiatives it addresses, the rationale for it, the recommended action, and some discussion points around it. This version that I just hang on that I just popped up to your inquiry is not quite final, but that was the approach that we used, and the rationale as to why we would enter into these discussions with Patterson Farm Preservation, the actions to be taken, and some of the parameters around that.
So to probably your point, Joe, I think the AOY is act more as a tenant, traditional tenant, maybe with some responsibilities here and there, depending on the facility of the building, versus Patterson Farm Preservation might be more of a manager because they actually want to do work on the buildings versus just be a tenant, right? So
Right.
that's the difference between the two. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's the orientation, and in both cases, our orientation was to start small. You know, here's pick Satterthwaite, for example, with Patterson Farm Preservation. Here's 2 buildings and a near-term lease, and let's set out common goals, achieve the things to be achieved, performance measures to be achieved after the first year. And if those are achieved, then it gets renewed, or we expand it, or we modify it depending upon that experience. So it was kind of, in both cases, kind of a walk before we run, not a totally comprehensive agreement, but one that gives a good probability of success, but also keep some checks in place.
Yeah,
If that
But I-
makes sense.
But I think then it's our aspiration, though, is to have both the agreements be the same.
Yes.
That's our aspiration.
some point.
Yeah. that's-
Yeah. Yeah. But one is already very heavy into programming and
They're two different-
events and things and not into buildings, and the other is just oriented kind of the opposite. So it makes sense where they're each coming from.
But you can imagine, I mean, the master plan calls for kind of establishing two campuses, one focused around arts, one focused around agricultural heritage. And you can imagine having multiple nonprofits working on each. And I think the idea is that the overriding nonprofit foundation would oversee the preservation efforts, making sure they're in line with the Secretary of Interior standards, as well as be making sure the consistency in the way the leases are handled.
Nice.
So it'll take the township out of the property management.
Love that.
Trying to have an effective buffer there. Still owned, but not have to manage day to day, which I get.
And then relative to the actual agricultural aspects of it, the township still owns, manages that with leases it to a farmer, farmers,
Right.
at least for now, and then go from there. Okay.
Right.
No proposed changes to that.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, under this scenario, basically the township would have two agreements, one with the farmer for the agricultural production and one with the Thomas Janney Foundation for the buildings and all the building site kind of activities. Yeah.
And then they would manage the two leaseholders or whatever we refer to them finally.
Yeah, and they would lease, they would be able, the nonprofit would be able to sublease to others, whether it's AOY or Blacksmith Jones,
I hear
kind
they're great too.
of. Yeah. So other discussions on these three elements, because it will be a topic on Wednesday. We want to be clear and concise. As you say, it's going to be a busy meeting. So other thoughts or refinements that we need? No? Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Good discussion. Moving on, the other agenda item is the building painting project review and recommendations. We had a proposal, the township got a proposal from a qualified organization to do painting, and we're under the assumption that all the buildings are are painted in lead. This committee discussed that at some length last month's meeting, and then in the interim, via email, we developed a list of priorities or recommendations and let me bring that document up. And let me.
And it says you're doing this priority list, is this pre or post interview of the painting contract?
Post.
Okay.
Post, yeah. And that interview went a long way. Yeah, it really did. And Peter couldn't be here tonight, but he was instrumental in really calling out some of the issues and the gaps that were there. So in summary, trying to increase this so it's more legible. On the Janney farmstead, there was a proposal for painting by building, or in a couple cases, a pair of buildings that totaled $140,000. Recognizing that not all buildings are in the same condition, not all buildings are of the same priority in terms of their appearance or their condition. The committee, we asked the committee to rank the priorities of their buildings on of each one of these proposals, with 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. So we went through that, and each committee member, put their ranking down as they saw it. I have an annoying Zoom screen on my screen that makes this hard to read. So what came out of that is on a score of 1 to 5, anything over, anything 4.5 to 5 was a top priority. So if we look at these three, move this back over. It's the packing shed. Let me get this on one. On the Janney farmstead, the packing shed, the cottage, the studio and the wishing well, and the garage, P5, were clearly seen by the committee members as very high. They had, in some cases, all 5s or 4 or 5 5s out of 6 votes. So that totaled 91,000 out of the 140. If we look at the second ranked, those that came up with an average of 4 to 4.5, there's 3 more buildings for a total of 30,000. Let me go down to Satterthwaite. On Satterthwaite, the main barn was a clear priority with an average of 4.7. And then the number 2 priority is the small barn. And I think primarily because of condition and visibility. Bottom line, the recommendation that this committee would make to Lower Makefield Township Public Works to contract this painting is about half of it is a top priority, and it's those that subgroup of those four buildings, and then there's a kind of a close second priority for another 14%. So about 60%, 59% of the total cost we're recommending should be contracted for next spring. It's too late to get anything started now. It's important to point out that these costs do not include any change orders for carpentry work that may be beyond the scope of the proposal. And that was in the back of the minds of the committee as it thought this through. So we have priority 1, priority 2, proposing about 60% of that 280,000 or 165,000, and the rest we should wait on because we don't feel it's probably worth the dollars and the complications of painting some of these buildings that are perhaps in too rough a condition, and the painting cost might really understate what the total cost would be. So that I just captured everyone's vote. That's how it came out. Open to discussion
And I said,
or debate.
just for the record, I think you didn't mention the main barn on the Janney side. As one of the priorities.
Yes, you're right. Sorry. Oh no, that's the main house and shed. Help me out. Oh, main barn. Sorry, it's the first one, of course. Sorry. Yes, the main barn, the Thomas Janney house, and the caretaker garage, small studio were clearly the highest. And the benefit of the painting was both to seal the lead, to improve the look of the property overall as we go out looking for the community commitment and involvement to contribute towards improving these buildings. It's important that we show some progress, and the wood is continuing to deteriorate, as was pointed out by Peter and others. And if it's going to take us some years to get to some of these buildings, we should protect them and protect them now, because they would probably be, I think it was stated, a 5 to 7 year paint cycle anyway. So if it's 5 years before we get back to some of these buildings, that wasn't a wasted coat of paint at all. You know, we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait till they're improved before we paint them.
Has our township manager received this table yet?
Did I send this to them? Yes, yes, I sent it to David and Derek
Okay.
as our input, and that we would be discussing it at this meeting. Yeah.
Oh, good. I just want to make sure that they have it in context for the budget. We're gonna, as I mentioned,
Okay.
it's a budget meeting. We're gonna have more than one budget meeting, but
Okay.
if we're gonna be managing.
I'll double check,
wanna
but I'm
make sure he
pretty
has it.
confident
Okay.
I sent that to them. Yes.
Thank you.
One thing we should add is a suggested contingency amount, because we do know that there will be repairs needed to do this.
You're
scope.
right.
So we should,
Yeah, this footnote is important, excludes change orders, and we do know there will be change orders.
Yeah.
We're not sure their
30%.
magnitude, so you have to put
I'm just saying, if you're doing a budget, you want to
Yeah.
make sure that's built in.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
and yeah, that's an excellent point. Other discussion on the PR painting proposals? We had beat it up pretty hard last time, and in the interim as well.
And I may be jumping the gun here. Did anything else come out of the meetings with the painting contractors and this review in terms of potential recommendations for spend, again, budget context for spend in 2025 outside of painting and setting, moving forward with the 501c3 and all that stuff?
Not with the painting contractors per se, but we do have a very, the DeLuca builders provided us very generously with some free cost estimates for some of the infrastructure at the site. And there was a conference call with DeLuca's engineers and DeLuca and the township staff that I was not a part of here in the last week or so to clarify that. But that, just those cost estimates would have cost us quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
And so I know David and Derek have those, and they know the context in which to think about them in terms of how tentative or how the magnitude of the assumptions that the engineer for DeLuca had to make. But we do have some what I thought looked like some pretty detailed cost estimates for some of the driveway improvements, the new farmer access driveway, which is important, running water, bringing public water in and sewer, again, with some macro assumptions being made. But that's important information for the budget. Yeah.
I do have a question when it comes with regards to the budget in phase one. And it was my understanding at the end of the master plan development, there was a budget established to support the phase one improvements. I forget what the exact number of that was right now.
700,000.
700,000. Okay. And, there are, there's issues about environmental cleanup. We got that report back this week around some of those issues. Siler Drury had uncovered some topics around water abatement, which is really bad for the buildings if we don't. And my question is are we prioritizing the right things, or are we actually spending the money as the proposals come in, right? Like, to me, if we get through the 700,000, but we haven't cleaned up the site so that volunteers can go on and we can lease it, and we haven't actually done water abatement on the buildings, that's not a good outcome. Right? So my question is how are we prioritizing what those first steps should be, or how that first 700 should be spent?
From a township perspective, remediation and worker safety is number one, right? So I think you're referring to the phase one ESA that was completed, environmental site assessment. They recommended phase two, which is sampling in certain areas to see exactly what they found where there's, they call AOCs, areas of concern, or RECs. That I don't believe has happened yet. So that will likely be the next spend. Those aren't big number spends. It's how you deal with the stuff that you find, which can be bigger number spends. That's what I've been pushing for personally for the last couple of years to get done. Soil remediation, everything else. But at the same time, as we're painting, we want to make sure that we don't get more paint chips coming off into the soil that we have to deal with again. So getting all of that into one package ASAP, including the water stuff and everything else, is, I think that's what the board has heard and is trying to be the first priority. We just have to get these proper studies completed so we know exactly what we have to do. That should be coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've consistently operated with the same set of priorities of, as you say, protecting stopping the water remediation in the buildings, the environmental cleanup. These are absolutely critical for sure. And to begin some of the basic infrastructure that we know needs to be done, kind of independent of ultimately how many tenants and what kind of tenants are there, like the farm access road. They need a separate access than right through the center of those homesteads, as is provided now. So I think we've been consistent on that, but you're right. We need the numbers to know that we're fitting it in to that, and we're also learning of more grants and grant opportunities that can also contribute to those. We don't have to live within that 700 right now if we can complement that with grants. So
I don't mean to suggest that proposal development is bad. I mean, it's giving us a lot of clarity to put numbers around some of the things that were just bullet points on there. So I think it's good. Yeah, my only concern is if we start spending without having the entire picture, then maybe we're not optimizing the spending.
you'll never have the entire picture. I think at some point you have to start, journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single first step. We won't know the end. Realistically, I think we can anticipate the next step or two, but then there'll be new contingencies, So it's a judgment call. Yeah. I don't disagree with you. It's a refinement.
And to your point about the 700,000 or any number of spend, this, I think the budget process this year will be really interesting to see some of the issues that we have to deal with overall as a township, and then how we prioritize the different buckets of spend that we have to do. And we're just getting into that. So I couldn't tell you which ones are the hot button issues just yet, but even in order to spend that 700K, I think we're going to be pretty creative with our township budget to be able to put that money towards this, which is super frustrating. So to your point about raising other funds or grants, I think that's going to be another big priority pretty soon with everything that we're dealing with right now.
Well, the best thing we can do to supplement the 700,000 and to bring the money in is to get the new 501c3 established, because with that, it makes us a much stronger grant application, and it also, we can begin the capital campaign that we know we need, and I think we can envision the first few $100,000, and that's important because that's just seed money but we can't start at zero. So, but that 501c3 to me is the rate limiting step right now.
One thing, as Peter pointed out in detail several times, one thing that we haven't mentioned specifically is carpentry and structural work. Other than the contingency that Jennifer mentioned for the painting project, they're not either able to or intending to do any major wood repair or structural repair, certainly. So that's another area that hasn't been defined in terms of cost.
I agree. That's key. And it's also one of the reasons why I think getting deeper into the discussions with both AOI and Patterson Farm Preservation would be helpful, because they will have their own priority for buildings. And if they say, well, that's the most important, and here's what we can do, and here's how much is needed, we can begin to price and to figure that out. Because right now the list of needs is a lot longer than our ability to address them. So if those two tenants, if you will, can help us prioritize, that's a value in and of itself in my book. All right. Are we done with the painting? Great. Bear with me. So, Joe and Ron, this document may be something you want to use for Wednesday, maybe abbreviated or consolidated. I know you have that for the Board of Supervisors meeting, if you want to Dan's point of helping to put it into context. This kind of starts with just quickly with the master plan.
Dan, was this in your material for Wednesday's meeting? Or have you not looked yet? Because David asked me for, so when I responded, I had sent.
I don't know that I have gotten the SharePoint stuff yet.
It might already be there, but if not,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So is on the agenda item, is it this group going to be presenting to the board, or is David going to be summarizing this to the board and we talk about and move forward?
Ron and I will be presenting to the board. David asked us which of those two options we preferred, and we said that we would present. And then we're there to answer questions.
Good. Well, I would anticipate a quick meeting then. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Very well done.
If you want brief, I think we can do that.
I think it's going to be not, and it's by no means to say that this stuff isn't important, obviously, but I think these are good recommendations that you can hopefully briefly summarize and get some support pretty quickly.
Well, it can be very brief because it is important and it's so obvious of a decision.
Even I,
Right. Right. Okay. That's really our agenda. Item 5 is other business. Is there other topics or business to be addressed by the committee? We do have, well, let me hold off on that. Any public comment? No public comment. Thank you. Review of next steps or assignments. Fred, did you pick up any, Master Secretary?
Other than the meeting on Wednesday, I didn't hear any
Okay.
additional.
And I'll confirm that Kratzer and Derek have the painting proposals. I'll just confirm that. Okay.
And our next meeting then is scheduled for November 14th, Thursday the 14th at 7:30.
Right. We'll get back to our 7:30 time slot. Okay. And in December, was it December 12th? If memory serves me.
Yes, December
Okay.
12th.
Okay.
Dennis, one question. We have entered into preliminary lease discussions. What is the next step on that? Is it before the board? Does the board have the?
Well, I think we
proposals?
want to hear the Board of Supervisors to give this committee that authority to enter into those discussions.
Yep.
And then we can get fairly detailed, and we'll keep, kind of the township posted along the way. So it's not a big surprise at the end, but
Yeah.
try to get it to some executable point.
Yeah, my discussions with board members, bless you, and staff on specific lease issues, to your point, they don't want it to get too far down the road with specific ideas and goals and aspirations and agreements without being vetted by the township every step of the way and make sure it's in line with what the township wants to see. Sometimes there are big ideas that kind of go left when we might want to go right for whatever reason, right? So I think it's important to maybe set up some guidelines to get into those, and where, I don't know, we of course have a 5-member board that all has to, or 3 of us at least have to agree on what those guidelines are. But we really just want to make sure that everyone's singing from the same sheet music kind of thing.
And we had provided to David some very broad basic parameters for each as strictly an outline, which he said he would review and, kind of, I guess, bounce off of the board or bounce off of you. I'm not sure what's happened with that, but we have those broad, we have a
haven't had any
draft
formal
of those broad
discussions. Yeah,
parameters.
I'm aware of that. We haven't had any formal discussions about that. I think, kind of to your earlier points, the main focus was getting that 501c3 set up, hopefully getting that painting contract done or on the books so we can move forward. Hopefully getting that phase 2 ESA done soon so we can deal with that stuff, really pushing that. And then when it comes to lease terms or any of those other terms, that would be a little bit more in the future, not much in the future, but soon. But let the board kind of meet and review that, what our options might be.
Yeah, I think it would be good if there are attractive, mutually attractive agreements to both parties, that they could be entered into by the spring when,
Yeah.
there'll be new growth and new activity, right?
Yeah. So to your point, I think over
yeah.
maybe not
Okay.
at this week's meeting,
Right.
but in future meetings, not that far down the road, we can work all that out and hit the spring running sort of thing.
Okay. Any other comments before we ask for a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion?
Is there any public comment? No public comment?
No public comment.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all very much for all your work and effort.